The sky over Zithra shimmered with colors no human eye had ever seen. It was not just the sunset, though that alone was enough to leave one breathless. But the entire atmosphere seemed to glow with a gentle light, like the planet itself was alive and aware. From the tallest spire of the palace, Empress Leora watched the horizon, her posture perfect, her sapphire eyes reflecting the streaks of gold and violet in the sky. She had ruled her people for 10 years now, guiding them through peace, change, and the quiet politics of a world that was both wondrous and demanding. At 30 years old, she was still considered young for a ruler, yet already she carried the weight of her position in every graceful movement, every careful word, and every small smile she allowed herself today. However, there was a tension she could not easily hide. A human had arrived on Zithra, sent as a diplomatic envoy from a distant planet called Earth. His name was Ethan Cross, and he was unlike anyone she had ever met. Humans were rare in Zithra's history, and the stories told by her advisors painted them as unpredictable, fragile, and often too emotional for serious matters. Leora, ever composed and careful, had expected a nervous and rigid figure, someone who would follow protocols and fear making mistakes. Instead, Ethan seemed to move through her palace as if he belonged there. Curious, respectful, and remarkably unafraid, he had arrived earlier that morning, stepping onto the polished marble floors of the palace with a gentle, confident stride. Leora had observed him from above, hidden behind the intricate latticework of her private balcony. The human paused at the center of the grand hall, turning his head slowly to take in the towering statues, the flowing banners, and the hundreds of servants, guards, and advisors who quietly observed him from the edges of the room. Instead of awe or fear, his face reflected genuine curiosity. He looked at everything: the architecture, the lights, the colors, with a kind of wonder that was entirely new to Leora. The Empress herself descended from her throne with a graceful elegance, each step measured, every movement a demonstration of the dignity expected of a leader. The guards parted automatically, creating a pathway as she approached the human. When she stopped before him, their eyes met. There was a spark in that moment, though she would never have admitted it aloud. Ethan bowed respectfully, yet there was no stiffness in his posture, no fear in his gaze. He simply looked at her, openly, as though seeing her not just as a ruler, but as a person. "Empress Leora," he said, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the marble hall without hesitation. "It is an honor to meet you. I hope I can learn from your people and share what I can in return." Leora inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words. She found herself studying him, noticing details she had never expected to see in a human. His eyes were bright, intelligent, and unguarded. His expression carried an honesty that was rare among diplomats, even among her own species. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, only a quiet eagerness to understand. For a ruler accustomed to careful flattery and calculated words, this was both refreshing and disarming. "You may walk with me," Leora said, gesturing to the long corridor that led to her private audience chambers. "I will show you the parts of our palace most often hidden from visitors." As they moved, Ethan observed everything with gentle reverence. He paused to admire the intricate carvings on the walls, the delicate way the light fell through crystal windows, and the patterns in the floors that told stories of Zithra's history. Leora noticed the small smile that appeared on his face now and then, a sign of genuine pleasure rather than polite acknowledgement. It was a smile that, without meaning to, began to thaw something inside her, a part of her that had grown accustomed to the cold formality of court life. "Your people have built something extraordinary," Ethan said softly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "The craftsmanship, the way light interacts with everything, it feels alive." Leora allowed herself a faint smile, a rare and subtle acknowledgement of his words. "Zithra has always valued harmony," she replied. "We believe that beauty is not just decoration, it is part of the way we live and govern. Even small details matter because they reflect our respect for life itself." Ethan nodded, clearly impressed. "It is different from Earth," he said. "We create for function first, beauty second. But seeing this, I can understand the care and thought behind every choice. It is inspiring. They continued through the palace, talking quietly as Leora explained the history of the great halls, the purpose of the statues, and the traditions that guided her people. The more she spoke, the more she realized how different Ethan's perspective was. He asked questions that no Zithran had ever asked, questions not born of suspicion or critique, but of genuine curiosity. He wanted to know how the people of Zithra felt about their customs, what they thought of their leaders, and how they imagined the future of their world. It was unusual for anyone to consider the thoughts and feelings of Zithrans themselves. Leaders were respected, but few ever acknowledged the voices of ordinary citizens. Leora found herself admiring Ethan's approach, though she reminded herself to remain cautious. Political alliances were delicate, and emotions, however sincere, could be exploited. Their conversation led them to the throne room, a vast expanse of polished floors, floating lights, and high ceilings that reflected the sky beyond. Leora's throne was a masterpiece of art and engineering, seemingly both solid and ethereal at once. She gestured for Ethan to stand at the center as she returned to her seat. "You may rest here for a moment," she said. "It is customary for visitors to be shown the throne, though few are invited to approach closely." Ethan nodded, not out of deference, but with a quiet respect for the gesture. He walked to the center of the room, gazing up at the Empress. For a moment, the hall was silent except for the soft hum of the palace itself, the way it seemed to breathe around them. Leora watched him carefully, noting the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his eyes roamed not to judge but to learn. Then, almost without warning, Ethan excused himself. "I should explore more of the palace before the evening council," he said. "Thank you for showing me this." He turned and walked away, his steps steady and confident. Leora remained seated, her posture perfect, yet inside, something stirred. She had expected visitors to leave politely, perhaps intimidated by the throne, or overwhelmed by her presence. But Ethan's departure felt different. There was a quiet dignity in the way he walked away, a grace that matched her own yet came from a completely foreign source. For a long moment, she simply watched him go, standing as still as her throne allowed. Then, in a rare and private gesture, she allowed her hand to brush against her face. A single tear, unnoticed by anyone else, slid down her cheek. She quickly turned her hand away, hiding the evidence. But the moment had already revealed a crack in her carefully maintained composure. Empress Leora was no stranger to emotion, but it had been many years since anyone human or Zithran had stirred something so quietly profound within her. She knew she could not allow herself to dwell on it, not yet. Duty came first, always. The throne was not a place for sentiment, and yet, watching Ethan walk away, she felt the faintest spark of curiosity and something more, a feeling she could not yet name. The palace staff moved around her as if nothing had happened. Advisors whispered quietly in the corners, servants adjusted the floating lights, and guards patrolled with silent precision. All appeared normal, orderly, and disciplined. Leora herself stood again, masking the tremor in her hand, and resumed the steady rhythm of ruling. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her mind wandered back to the human who had entered her life so unexpectedly, and she could not deny the sense of change he brought with him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the skies into a deeper shade of violet and gold, Leora returned to her private chambers. She looked out at the city below, where thousands of lights twinkled like stars, reflecting the careful harmony her people had created over centuries. And there, in the quiet of her solitude, she let herself imagine the possibility that this human Ethan was more than a visitor. Perhaps, in some small and unpredictable way, he was a key to something new, something that could shape her world in ways even she had not yet understood. For the first time in many years, Empress Leora allowed a small, silent thought to linger in her mind, that someone from another world, someone so entirely different, could open her eyes to possibilities she had never considered. She wiped her tears once more, hiding them beneath the flawless composure of the ruler she had always been. Yet the feeling remained, quiet but persistent. Tonight, she told herself, she would sleep with the palace silent around her, the city glowing below, and the memory of the human who had just walked away from her throne lingering in her mind. And though she would never show it to anyone, the smallest spark of hope and curiosity had been lit in her heart, one that would not be easily extinguished. The following morning, the palace of Zithra was bathed in a soft, golden light. The floating lamps adjusted automatically, reflecting a gentle glow across the marble floors. But it was not the palace itself that captured attention. It was the Empress Leora, standing at the balcony once more, watching the gardens below as the first visitors arrived. Despite her young age, she carried the aura of a leader who had seen much, experienced much, and yet kept her mind open for what was yet to come. Her thoughts, however, were not on politics or ceremonies. They were on the human, Ethan Cross. He had not returned yet, but she felt certain he would appear. Something about him, the simplicity of his curiosity and the way he treated her people, had struck a chord in her accord that was both unfamiliar and intriguing. She remembered his eyes as he had walked through the palace yesterday, unafraid, respectful, and genuinely curious. Even the way he had excused himself from her throne had seemed natural, not forced or cautious. She had expected awkwardness or awe, but he had simply been human. And there was a quiet power in that dot when Ethan arrived later that morning. He was accompanied by a small delegation of translators and advisors, all carefully chosen by his team to ensure proper communication. But Ethan seemed uninterested in the formality. He moved through the palace as though it were a living, breathing organism, noticing details others would have overlooked. He admired the delicate patterns on the balcony railings, the way sunlight refracted through the crystal windows, and the soft hum of Zithra's technology blending seamlessly with nature. "Good morning, Empress," Ethan said as he approached. His voice carried warmth, not just respect. "I hope I am not intruding. I thought perhaps I could learn more about your people by seeing where they live, work, and gather." Leora inclined her head, her lips curling in the faintest acknowledgement of approval. "You are not intruding. Our people are proud of Zithra and of their traditions. They welcome those who show interest, though not many humans have visited before. You will see much that surprises you." She led him through a series of gardens, each more elaborate than the last. The flowers and plants glowed softly with bioluminescence, responding to the gentle rhythm of the wind and the sunlight. Leora explained the purpose of each garden, how certain plants were cultivated for food, medicine, or even art, and how each was arranged to balance beauty with practicality. Ethan listened intently, asking questions that revealed a mind eager to understand rather than impress. "Your people seem to think carefully about every detail," he said, pausing to touch the smooth surface of a glowing flower. "It's more than decoration. Everything has meaning and purpose." Leora nodded. "We believe that life is a balance. Every action has an effect. Every creation carries intention. That is how we have survived, thrived, and kept peace for generations." Ethan smiled. "It is different from Earth. There, people often focus on what is urgent or useful first. Beauty second. But seeing your gardens, your architecture, I understand the care that went into every choice." For a moment, Leora allowed herself to relax. With most visitors, she maintained an almost invisible barrier between her feelings and her duties. But with Ethan, the barrier seemed unnecessary. He treated her not just as a ruler, but as a person. He asked about her thoughts, her experiences, and even her hopes for the future of Zithra. She found herself answering, more openly than she had expected. They reached a quiet garden terrace, where small streams of water ran along channels that glowed faintly in the morning light. Leora gestured for Ethan to sit on a carved stone bench, and she took a seat opposite him. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice gentle but direct. "I mean, leading a people, making decisions that affect thousands or millions. It must be difficult to carry all that responsibility." Leora considered the question. Few had ever asked it in a way that showed real concern rather than curiosity. She chose her words carefully. "There are times when the weight is heavy. I have learned to carry it by focusing on what matters most, understanding my people, respecting their needs, and making choices that honor our traditions while guiding us toward a better future." Ethan nodded. That sounds admirable and difficult, but it also sounds like you listen, not just command. That is rare. The Empress allowed a small smile. Listening is more important than commanding. A ruler who does not understand the voices of the people cannot lead wisely. That is a lesson my advisors remind me of every day. Ethan leaned forward slightly. And do they listen to you as well? Leora's eyes sparkled, a hint of amusement and pride showing through her calm exterior. They do, though not always willingly. But they are learning. As am I for several hours, they walked through the palace and the gardens, visiting workshops where Zithrans created art, music, and technological innovations. Ethan asked questions that went beyond curiosity, questions that encouraged the artists and engineers to think about their work in new ways. Leora watched with quiet fascination. He seemed to have a natural ability to see possibilities that others overlooked. He did not criticize. He offered perspective. He did not dominate. He inspired. At one point, they entered a hall filled with holographic displays showing the history of Zithra. Leora explained the rise and achievements of her people, the challenges they had faced, and the balance of power that had kept their society harmonious for centuries. Ethan listened without interruption, occasionally asking about details that sparked further conversation. Your people have managed to preserve knowledge and culture for generations, Ethan observed. It is remarkable. On Earth, we often lose history because we do not see its value until it is gone. Leora nodded. That is why we teach our history through every creation, every work of art, and every tradition. It is not enough to remember. One must feel the lessons in every action. Ethan's response was simple, yet thoughtful. I can feel it. Even now, walking through these halls, I can sense the care and thought behind everything. It is inspiring. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the gardens and palace, Leora realized that she was no longer simply observing Ethan. She was learning from him. His perspective, so different from her own, was opening her eyes to new ways of thinking. She found herself imagining what Zithra could become if more humans visited, if more ideas flowed freely between their worlds. Yet even as she welcomed this new perspective, a small worry lingered. Politics, tradition, and perception were constant companions in her life. A ruler who became too attached or distracted could be seen as weak. And though Ethan had so far shown nothing but respect, the mere presence of a human in her life challenged norms she had long upheld. She pushed the thought aside, choosing instead to focus on the moment, on the curiosity and connection that had sparked between them. By afternoon, they reached a quiet pavilion overlooking the city. Leora gestured for Ethan to sit, and she sat across from him once more. They watched as Zithrans moved through the streets below, conducting daily tasks with the precision and care of a society built on harmony and respect. Ethan broke the silence. Your people seem happy, content, not in the way that comes from obedience or fear, but in the way that comes from purpose and pride. Leora considered his words. Happiness is not always visible, and it is not always simple. But yes, our people take pride in their contributions. They understand their role in the greater whole. That is what gives them purpose. He nodded slowly. It is different from what I have seen on Earth. There, people often struggle to find meaning beyond themselves. Seeing your world, it gives me hope that cooperation and respect can truly create something lasting. Leora felt a quiet warmth in her chest. It was unusual for her to feel such personal resonance with a visitor. Yet Ethan's words were genuine, thoughtful, and unassuming. She realized that the human's presence was changing the way she thought not just about him, but about her own people, her own leadership, and even herself. As the afternoon waned, Ethan excused himself again, politely indicating he wished to explore other parts of the palace. Leora remained seated, watching him walk away with the same quiet grace she had observed yesterday. Once again, she felt a tug at her heart, a sense of loss mingled with anticipation. She allowed herself the briefest moment of reflection before returning to her duties, carefully hiding the emotions that might reveal weakness to her advisors or her people. Yet, as she resumed her scheduled meeting with council members, reviewing reports, and planning upcoming ceremonies, her mind returned again and again to the human who had entered her life so unexpectedly. He had not impressed her with power, wealth, or flattery, but with something far rarer: insight, respect, and authenticity. That night, alone in her chambers, Leora stood once more at her balcony, staring at the glowing city below. She thought of the day's conversations, the quiet moments in the gardens, and the human's simple yet profound observations. She realized that she looked forward to his visits, to the fresh perspective he brought, and to the unexpected ways he inspired her to think differently. As she turned to retire for the evening, Leora allowed herself a private smile, delicate and unguarded. A single tear slipped down her cheek, hidden in the dim light of her chamber, not from sadness, but from the morning light filtered through the crystal windows of the palace, casting prismatic colors across the marble floors. The city below shimmered softly as Zithrans began their daily routines, moving with purpose and harmony. Empress Leora stood on her balcony, watching the orderly rhythm of her people, but her thoughts were on the human. Ethan Cross. He had been in her palace for several days now, and already his presence had begun to affect the way she saw her world. Not because he commanded attention or power, but because he noticed details, appreciated beauty, and asked questions that made her think differently about her own people and traditions. Ethan entered the chamber quietly, as he always did, his steps gentle against the smooth floor. He carried with him a small portfolio of sketches and notes, his curiosity apparent in every gesture. "Good morning, Empress," he said, bowing slightly. "I have been thinking about your gardens and workshops. I wonder if we could create something together, a project that shows what humans and Zithrans can do when we combine our perspectives." Leora raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Collaboration with a human was unconventional, especially on a project that would involve her people so openly. But something in Ethan's voice, in the way he spoke with respect and excitement rather than arrogance, sparked a sense of possibility. "What do you have in mind?" she asked. He opened his portfolio, revealing sketches of architectural designs, holographic displays, and artistic concepts. "I thought we could create a cultural exhibition," he said. "One that merges your traditions and technology with human ideas, art, and stories. It would be a way for both our peoples to learn from each other and celebrate our differences." Leora studied the sketches carefully. They were thoughtful, not overwhelming, with designs that emphasized collaboration and creativity. She saw potential in the project, not only as a cultural endeavor, but as an opportunity to inspire her people, to encourage them to think in ways they might not have considered before. "Very well," she said finally. "We will try it, but it must honor Zithra's traditions while exploring new possibilities. We cannot lose sight of our values." Ethan nodded eagerly. "Of course, Empress. I would not want to change what makes your world unique. I want to add perspective, not replace it." The days that followed were filled with activity, laughter, and unexpected discoveries. Workshops were organized, with Zithran artists, engineers, and scholars working alongside Ethan and a small group of human assistants. At first, some of the Zithrans were skeptical, unsure of the humans' understanding of their culture. But as Ethan asked thoughtful questions and encouraged collaboration rather than imposing ideas, they began to respond. He marveled at the subtlety of Zithran music, the precision of their art, and the elegance of their technology. In turn, he shared stories from Earth, demonstrating how human creativity often stemmed from emotion, improvisation, and curiosity. The Empress watched them, fascinated by how effortlessly he could bridge the two worlds. His presence encouraged Zithrans to think differently without disrespecting their own heritage, and she found herself smiling more often than she had in years. One afternoon, Leora led Ethan to a large hall where holographic displays floated above a polished floor. "This is our history hall," she explained. "Here, we preserve our culture, achievements, and important events. It is meant to educate, but also to remind us of our responsibilities." Ethan studied the displays intently. "This is incredible," he said. "You have preserved knowledge in a way that is interactive, engaging, and meaningful. On Earth, we often rely on books, which are static and sometimes forgotten. Here, history feels alive. Leora nodded. That is our goal. Knowledge must be felt, not just read. It must influence our actions and decisions. He looked at her thoughtfully. And do you feel it? Do you feel the weight of your history when you make choices as a ruler? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, it is a constant presence. Every choice I make is informed by the past, yet must consider the future. It is not easy, but it is necessary. Ethan smiled softly. You carry it well. It is rare to see someone so young who can balance responsibility and vision with such grace. The Empress felt a warmth she could not name. Compliments were not unusual, but when they came from someone who truly understood her perspective, they held a different weight. She said nothing, only inclined her head, allowing the acknowledgement to pass silently between them. Over the next several days, the cultural exhibition began to take shape. Humans and Zitherans worked side by side, blending music, art, and technology. Ethan encouraged the Zitherans to experiment, to see familiar things in new ways, and they discovered innovations they had never imagined. Leora observed quietly, guiding when necessary, but mostly watching. The human's presence had begun to transform her court, not through command, but through inspiration. Yet not all attention was positive. Some advisors whispered among themselves, skeptical of the Empress's openness. A human cannot understand our ways, one muttered. This project may weaken her authority if we are not careful. Leora heard the whispers but did not respond immediately. She had long learned to navigate dissent quietly. Still, she felt the familiar tension of balancing personal curiosity with duty. She could not let her interest in Ethan or his ideas compromise her leadership. And yet, she found herself returning to his perspective again and again, considering it carefully before making any decision. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep violet, Leora walked with Ethan through the partially completed exhibition. The glowing holograms reflected in their eyes, and the sound of Zither music blended with human instruments in a harmony that was both unusual and beautiful. It is coming together nicely, Ethan said, his eyes bright with excitement. The combination of our ideas feels alive. It's more than I imagined. Leora allowed herself a small smile. You have shown us perspectives we had not considered. That is a gift. He looked at her, a hint of hesitation in his expression. I hope I am not overstepping. I do not wish to interfere with your leadership. You do not, she assured him. You offer insight. That is different, and it is welcome. For a moment, they walked in silence, each lost in thought. Leora reflected on the subtle changes happening around her. The people she had ruled for years were beginning to embrace new ideas, not because she commanded them to, but because a human had shown them a different way of thinking. She felt a quiet pride, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Later, as they rested in the garden pavilion, Ethan asked, Empress, may I ask something personal? Leora regarded him carefully, curious but cautious. You may. Do you ever feel lonely? He asked softly. Even with all your responsibilities, advisors, and people around you, do you feel alone at times? Leora paused. The question was unexpected, yet it struck her truthfully. Leadership often brought isolation, a sense of distance from those she ruled, and even from those she trusted. Sometimes, she admitted quietly, but it is not a weakness. It is part of the role. One must learn to carry solitude with strength. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I understand, but even in solitude, it seems you are open to learning, to seeing the world in new ways. That is a rare strength. Her lips curved slightly in acknowledgement. His words were sincere, yet unassuming, and they carried a weight she could not easily dismiss. She realized that his presence had become more than an educational opportunity. It had become a quiet influence on her perspective, encouraging her to consider not only the present and the past, but new possibilities for the future. As night fell, Leora returned to her chambers, reflecting on the day. She had allowed herself small smiles, quiet laughter, and even brief moments of wonder. The human had introduced a new rhythm to her palace, a rhythm that blended curiosity, respect, and openness. She understood that she must maintain her composure, but she also recognized the subtle strength in embracing new perspectives. A single tear slid down her cheek as she watched the city lights twinkle below. It was a tear of realization, of quiet hope, and of a connection that could change not only her own life, but the lives of her people. She wiped it away, leaving no evidence, and prepared for the next day, a day that promised more collaboration, more discovery, and the continued presence of the human who had quietly, yet profoundly, touched her world. The morning on Zithra was calm, yet tension hummed quietly through the palace corridors. Empress Leora moved with her usual grace, but her mind was focused on a challenge that was more delicate than any battlefield. The Interplanetary Council was scheduled to meet that day, and whispers of skepticism regarding her recent openness to human collaboration had already reached her. Some of her advisors questioned the influence of Ethan Cross, warning that the people might perceive her interest in a human as a sign of weakness. Leora, however, understood that true leadership was not about avoiding scrutiny, it was about guiding change with wisdom and courage. Ethan entered the palace before the council convened, carrying a portfolio of the exhibition's latest developments. The human's presence had become a comforting rhythm, in her day a reminder that insight could come from unexpected sources. "Good morning, Empress," he said with a respectful bow. "I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to review some ideas before the council gathers." Leora inclined her head. "You are not intruding. Your perspective is valuable, and it will be helpful in presenting our work to the council." Together, they moved through the exhibition hall, where human and Zithran ideas had merged into a remarkable display. Holographic art blended with physical sculptures. Music combined Zithran harmonics and human melodies, and interactive stations allowed visitors to engage with stories from both worlds. Leora could see the excitement in the eyes of the artists and engineers as they demonstrated their creations to her and Ethan. It was a living testament to what collaboration could achieve. As the council convened, Leora entered with Ethan by her side. The council chamber was vast, filled with delegates from Zithra and other allied planets. The seats were arranged in a semicircle, allowing all members to observe each other while maintaining focus on the Empress. Some delegates whispered quietly, casting curious glances at Ethan, while others appeared skeptical. Uncertain of the human's role in the proceedings, Leora remained calm, her posture perfect, her voice steady. "Honorable members of the council," she began, "today we present a demonstration of collaboration, how different perspectives can merge to create something meaningful for our people and for those who visit us." Ethan stepped forward, projecting a holographic display that illustrated the development of the cultural exhibition. He explained how human creativity, when combined with Zithran precision and tradition, had inspired new forms of art, music, and technology. His voice was clear, respectful, and confident, drawing attention not with force, but with the quiet power of understanding. Delegates watched, intrigued despite themselves. Questions arose, some skeptical, some curious, but Ethan's thoughtful responses and Leora's calm guidance created an atmosphere of mutual respect. She noticed the subtle shift in the room. Skepticism was giving way to interest, curiosity replacing doubt. One delegate, a seasoned Zithran scholar, finally spoke. "Empress, it is unusual to see a human so involved in our cultural affairs. How can we ensure that this does not compromise our traditions?" Leora responded with measured confidence. "We are not replacing our traditions. We are enhancing them by embracing new perspectives. This project honors our heritage while demonstrating the value of openness and learning. Leadership requires understanding, not rigidity. Strength comes from adaptability as well as consistency." The chamber fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words resonating. Then another delegate, younger and more open to innovation, spoke. "Empress, it is remarkable to see how the combination of human and Zithran ideas has inspired our people. The exhibition is proof that collaboration can enhance our culture without diminishing it." Leora allowed herself a subtle smile. The council's reaction reflected a quiet victory, not through confrontation or domination, but through vision and execution. She had navigated the skepticism carefully, allowing the work to speak for itself. Ethan's presence had been instrumental, but it was her leadership, her calm authority, and her thoughtful guidance that ensured the success of the presentation. After the council meeting, Leora returned to the exhibition hall with Ethan. The human's eyes sparkled with quiet pride, though he remained humble, aware that the accomplishment was shared with all who had contributed. The council seemed impressed. He said softly, "Your leadership made it possible. Without your guidance, none of this would have had the same impact." Leora nodded, her thoughts reflecting a mixture of pride and reflection. "The work speaks for itself, Ethan, and it has shown our people and our allies that openness can be a strength rather than a weakness. That is the lesson I wish to impart." They walked among the exhibits, observing Zitherans demonstrating their creations to visitors and each other. Leora noticed how artists, engineers, and scholars were thinking differently, inspired to explore new ideas without abandoning the core of their culture. The exhibition had become more than a display. It was a catalyst for growth and understanding. Later that afternoon, Leora and Ethan returned to the garden pavilion for a moment of quiet. The sunlight filtered through bioluminescent plants, creating a serene atmosphere that contrasted with the intensity of the council chamber. "You handled the council beautifully," Ethan said. "I could see the respect they gained for your leadership. You did not need to argue or defend yourself. You simply guided them to see the value in collaboration." Leora allowed herself a small, private smile. Leadership is not about winning debates. It is about guiding others to understand. Strength is shown in wisdom, not just in force or authority. Ethan nodded. "It is a rare quality. I hope one day I can learn to lead with the same balance of confidence and humility." The Empress considered his words. Humans were not as powerful as Zitherans in terms of technology or longevity, yet they possessed qualities that could inspire growth in her people: curiosity, creativity, and empathy. In guiding the exhibition, she realized that leadership was strengthened by incorporating these qualities, not by resisting them. As evening approached, Leora and Ethan walked through the palace gardens, observing the glowing plants and the gentle streams of water. The exhibition had been a success, but its true value lay in the subtle changes it had brought to the people. Conversations had shifted from rigid formality to thoughtful exchange. Artists experimented boldly. Scholars explored ideas they had previously dismissed. Even the guards and attendants had begun to notice the possibilities in small, meaningful innovations. Leora paused near a fountain, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. She reflected on her own growth over the past days, the way she had allowed curiosity to guide her decisions, the way she had trusted a human to inspire change without compromising her authority, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing her people respond positively. "You have changed more than just our culture, Empress," Ethan said softly, breaking her reflection. "You have inspired people to see the value of understanding and collaboration. That is a gift that goes beyond this exhibition." Leora looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and something she rarely allowed herself to feel: vulnerability. "It is not only my work," she said. "It is a shared effort. Leadership is strengthened by those who offer insight, who challenge assumptions, and who inspire growth. You have done that, Ethan." Quietly but profoundly, they walked in silence for a few moments, enjoying the peaceful harmony of the gardens. Leora felt a subtle shift within herself, a quiet acknowledgement that emotion and reflection did not weaken her, but rather strengthened her ability to guide her people. She realized that her connection with Ethan was not a distraction, but a source of insight that allowed her to see possibilities she had never considered. As night fell, the city lights glimmered below the palace, and Leora returned to her chambers. She stood at the balcony, staring at the vibrant world she had helped shape. The exhibition was complete, the council convinced, and her people inspired. Yet her thoughts lingered on the human who had walked alongside her, guiding her perspective with respect and subtle brilliance. A single tear slipped down her cheek, hidden in the dim light of her chamber. It was not a tear of sadness, but of quiet pride, reflection, and the realization that leadership could be enriched by openness and collaboration. She wiped it away, composed herself, and prepared for the next day, a day that promised further exploration, further understanding, and the continuing presence of the human who had become an unexpected, invaluable companion in her journey as Empress. The night air was cool and calm, carrying the soft sounds of Zithra's city below. Leora allowed herself a moment to breathe, to reflect, and to feel gratitude for the subtle power of perspective. The way a single human could inspire growth, understanding, and hope. It was a lesson she would carry forward, not just for the exhibition, but for the future of her people and the future of the bond between Zithra and Earth. The morning light on Zithra was soft and warm, spilling through the crystal windows of the palace and illuminating the corridors with a golden glow. Empress Leora walked quietly through the halls, her thoughts heavy yet focused. Today, Ethan Cross would leave. His mission as Earth's envoy was complete, and though his presence had been a source of insight and inspiration, the time had come for him to return to his own world. She felt a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a quiet sadness at the thought of his absence. Ethan had already begun gathering his things, careful not to disrupt the palace or the people who had grown fond of him. He had become a quiet presence in Zithra, admired not only by the Empress, but also by the artists, engineers, and scholars who had collaborated with him. His respect for their culture, his patience, and his curiosity had left a lasting impression. Leora observed him from a distance, noting how naturally he interacted with the people of her world. He had not demanded attention. He had earned it. When she approached him, he turned and smiled, a smile that was both gentle and genuine. "Good morning, Empress," he said. "I have packed my things and prepared for the journey. I wanted to see you one last time before I leave." Leora inclined her head, her expression calm yet reflective. "Good morning, Ethan. I am glad you came to see me. Your presence has been more than helpful. It has been inspiring." He bowed slightly, his eyes bright with sincerity. "It has been an honor to witness your world and your leadership. I have learned more than I could have imagined, not just about Zithra, but about the value of understanding, patience, and collaboration." The Empress gestured toward the balcony overlooking the city. They walked together in silence, taking in the vibrant streets below, where Zithrans moved gracefully in their daily tasks. The cultural exhibition had been a success, and the impact was already visible. Conversations among her people had shifted. Curiosity and innovation now blended with tradition, creating a sense of renewed energy and optimism. "You have changed more than just the exhibition," Leora said quietly. "You have reminded me that leadership is strengthened not only by wisdom, but by openness. You have shown that learning from others does not diminish authority, it enhances it." Ethan nodded. "That was my hope. I wanted to contribute, but also to respect your role in your culture. I did not expect to find such a profound lesson for myself." They stood together, the light of the morning reflecting in their eyes. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The quiet understanding between them spoke volumes. They had shared ideas, insights, and even subtle lessons in empathy and perspective. Each had influenced the other in ways neither could have predicted. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I will always remember this place, Empress, and I will carry the lessons I have learned here with me, and we will remember you." Leora replied softly, "Your presence has opened doors to new ways of thinking. Zithra is stronger because of your contributions, and I am grateful." As they approached the landing pad where Ethan's transport awaited, Zithrans gathered to watch. There were no speeches or ceremonies, only the quiet acknowledgement of a human who had touched their world in a meaningful way. Ethan moved with calm dignity, respectful of the people who had welcomed him so openly. Leora watched him, noting the steadiness of his movements, the clarity in his eyes, and the sincerity in his expression. Before boarding, Ethan turned to her one last time. "Empress Leora," he said, "I will not ask you to come with me. I know your duty is here, with your people. But I hope you will remember that openness, curiosity, and respect can bridge worlds, and that even small connections can have profound impact." Leora's lips curved into a faint, private smile. "I will remember, and I will continue to lead with the lessons you have shared, blending them with the wisdom of Zithra." Your journey may continue elsewhere, but your influence will remain here." He nodded, a subtle expression of gratitude passing between them. Then, with a final wave, he stepped onto the transport. The engines hummed softly, and the craft lifted into the sky, leaving the palace and the city below bathed in morning light. Leora watched until it disappeared into the distance, feeling a mixture of pride, melancholy, and hope. The day continued, but the absence of Ethan was palpable. Leora returned to her chambers, walking slowly through the familiar halls. She reflected on the past weeks, the conversations, the shared ideas, and the subtle shifts in her perspective. She realized that the human had not only influenced her people, but had also changed her understanding of leadership, responsibility, and openness. The lessons were clear. Strength came not from rigidity, but from empathy and collaboration. Authority was enhanced by listening, not by commanding alone. She paused in her chambers, looking out at the city below. The people moved with renewed purpose, their conversations richer, their creativity more vibrant. The exhibition had been more than an event. It had become a catalyst for growth and understanding. Leora felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the change was lasting, not fleeting, and that her people were better equipped to embrace new ideas while honoring their traditions. In the solitude of her chambers, she allowed herself a private moment of reflection. A single tear slid down her cheek, unseen, a symbol not of sadness, but of quiet gratitude and hope. She had led her people through many challenges, but the presence of a human had reminded her that leadership was also about openness, learning, and the courage to embrace the unfamiliar. The evening approached, and the palace glowed under the soft light of Zithra's twin moons. Leora walked through the gardens, observing the bioluminescent plants and gentle streams of water. The silence was peaceful, yet filled with a sense of possibility. She realized that while Ethan had left, the ideas and insights he brought remained, woven into the fabric of her world. The people she ruled were thinking differently, exploring new approaches, and finding joy in collaboration. She paused at a fountain, watching the water shimmer in the moonlight. Her thoughts returned to the human who had walked alongside her, guiding her perspective with quiet brilliance. She knew that life would continue, and that the lessons learned would shape her decisions and her people's growth for years to come. The experience had been transformative, not because it had been grand or dramatic, but because it had been genuine, respectful, and meaningful. In that moment, Leora understood something profound. Leadership was not about isolation, about maintaining a flawless exterior, or about avoiding vulnerability. True leadership embraced connection, insight, and trust. It welcomed the unfamiliar and found strength in learning from others. And sometimes, the most profound lessons came from those who seemed the most unlikely to teach them. As the night deepened, she returned to her balcony, gazing at the stars above Zithra. She thought of Earth, of the human who had left her world but had left a lasting impact. She felt a sense of calm, knowing that bridges had been built between worlds, not through force or domination, but through understanding, curiosity, and respect. The palace was quiet now, the city below glowing softly with life. Leora stood tall, her sapphire eyes reflecting the light of the moons and the stars. She allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that her people were stronger, her world richer, and her leadership more enlightened. The human who had walked away from her throne had done more than he realized. He had reminded her of the subtle power of humanity, the strength of perspective, and the quiet courage it took to embrace the new without abandoning the old. And as she turned away from the balcony to prepare for rest, Empress Leora felt a sense of completion and renewal. She had led, learned, and grown. Her people had flourished, her world had opened to new possibilities, and the memory of the human who had inspired her would remain, a guiding presence in the quiet corners of her heart and mind. The night wrapped the palace in tranquility, and the Empress allowed herself to finally rest, knowing that tomorrow, and every day after, she would continue to lead Zithra with the wisdom of tradition, the openness to innovation, and the courage to embrace the unfamiliar. And in that, she felt the quiet, enduring joy of a leader who had learned not only to rule, but to understand, inspire, and grow alongside those she served.